My name is Donna Opelka, and I'm the moderator this evening for the League of Women Voters of Davis Candidate Forum. It's May 7, 2014. We will have 4 questions that were posed by the League, which each of our candidates will answer. And then there will be a period of roughly 40 minutes after our break that we can deal with questions from the audience. And each of those will be 1-second responses by the candidates. So without further ado, if all of my colleagues would turn on their microphones, we can get started. I think we'll start with the statement from Rochelle Swanson being made by Nicole Arnold.
Yeah.
Nicole?
I'm sorry that I'm unable to attend in person today to answer your questions regarding my re-election to City Council. I would love to have been there, but I made commitments as a City Council member to go to Washington, D.C. to advocate on behalf of Davis over a year ago. I have said before that my duties as a council member come before my duties as a candidate. I'm thrilled to see that our community is as engaged as ever. I am in good company here in D.C. with colleagues from other communities in the middle of re-election campaigns, wishing we could be in 2 places at once. As part of Capital to Capital, a trip organized by Sacramento Metro Chamber, I have the opportunity to pursue our community's interests on the Hill and in the White House. As an example, earlier today, I met with Congressman John Garamendi, and we specifically discussed the concerns of Davis and other communities over the safety of crude oil transport via rail through our community. I think that the discussion that is about to take place in this room, as well as the discussions I've been having this last week, are all vital discussions for our community. This is especially true given the magnitude of the problems we face. As evidenced by the much-needed reprieve we may get from legislation currently being deliberated in Sacramento, we must continue to work with our regional and national partners. This effort directly influences our ability to secure a financial, sustainable future for Davis without sacrificing the things we've all come to love about our town. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And you can rejoin the audience and ask your own questions that way on the... Okay. The sequence of seating was chosen by lot, and the timing is going to be done by Jean Lund, who is the co-president of the Davis League. So we'll start with Daniel with question number 1. And I'll just read it, if I can find my copy. Yeah, I borrow yours. The questions. Why would you like to hold this office? Thank you.
Thank you for asking. Hey everybody, my name's Daniel Parrella. I'm a candidate for the Davis City Council. I'd like to thank all of you for coming out here tonight. I really appreciate it, and of course I want to thank the League for putting this together. I'm running for office for really 2 reasons. I kind of came to the realization that I may never be able to afford the house that I grew up in here in Davis. I'm a born and raised kid, the homegrown guy. And I realize I may never be able to afford the house I grew up in, and I want Davis to be a place where young people like me can start families, find high-paying jobs, and afford to live here. I know it's a tall order, but that's really where my inspiration has always drawn from. And I think that right now the decisions are being made by the council, and the decisions that will be made in the coming years will decide whether or not Davis becomes a town comprised of college students with parents rich enough for them to afford them to live here, and boomers with the money to live here. And I don't think we want to be in that town. I think that Davis has always been a multi-generational place, a place where our kids can go to elementary school and junior high and high school and graduate from here. And I want Davis to still be a place where young families can afford to live. And secondly, I look at the demographics of Davis. 55% are renters. The average age is about 25 years old. And I think that I represent a portion of Davis that hasn't been represented by the council council in some time. I think that I have more in common with the average Davisite than anyone up here, and I'm looking forward to representing them on the city council. I will say that my generation has not taken part when it comes to public service as of yet, but I look at the problems facing our nation and our state and the fiscal crisis facing even our local city government. I think it's about time that my generation steps up to the plate to deal with the problems that face us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Okay, the question now goes to John Munn. And John, you want to take it?
Well, first, thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us here tonight. Thank you for everyone coming on what I guess turned out to be pretty short notice. I do want to also thank Daniel for the comments. It's really a great start to what I have to say here. Because I'm running for City Council to work for fiscal sustainability so we can afford to continue to live in Davis. The city needs to get its financial house in order before taking on new projects and expenses, so we can afford to support the services, activities, and amenities that make Davis a great place to live. To do this, we need to solve problems instead of just talking about them, and I think I can help with that. There are 5 candidates running for 2 open seats. If you want to elect someone who will focus on balancing the budget while keeping Davis affordable, then one of your votes should be for me. The city is currently admitting to a $5 million deficit without counting the real costs of needed street repairs and employee pensions and health care. And these will add millions to our future annual costs. But the city can still seem to find $1 million to study a city-owned electric utility. And while not keeping its own fiscal house in order, the city wants more from the rest of us. According to the current City Council's own rate schedule, water costs will more than double for single-family residences over the next 5 years. And we're not finished with water rate increases because the city plans to again double revenue from water service after 2018. At the same time, they're planning to withdraw park irrigation from the new water system. I'll just point out that these are all reasons we need to vote yes on Measure P. The city also wants to increase charges for storm drainage, sewer service, trash pickup, and city taxes. These cost increases are not sustainable. They will hit hardest on middle-class families and on fixed-income residents. So I'm running for the City Council to help make sensible decisions that bring fiscal sanity and sustainability to Davis so that we can all continue to live here. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Sheila, you're next up.
Thank you very much, and my thanks also to the League and to the citizens here tonight and those out there in TV land and the internet. I'd like to begin by saying Happy Nurses Week to all of my fellow nurses out there. I happen to be a nurse, and although I didn't have anything to do with this decision, the theme for this year is Nurses Leading the Way. Isn't that a great idea? So I take very seriously the role of an elected official. I have had the pleasure of representing you, the citizens of Davis, as one of your school board members over the last 9 years. So I'm completing 2 terms on that. And during that time, I've learned a lot. One of the things I learned is that before I ran, I didn't really know that much. So we've just recently gone through a process where we appointed new people to the board. And I was thinking about back to the time before I ran for school board, and thought I would come forward with some great ideas and some criteria about why I should be elected. But what I really found out is that when you are choosing someone for your elected official, perhaps you should not think about one particular issue, but you should think about the long run. The 2 people that you elect are going to be your city council representatives for 4 years. So I hope you think about these kind of criteria. Is this somebody who's a hard worker? And I'd like to say that I have worked very hard on the school board. I've been on the number of the committees, and I do all my background work, and I meet with many citizens. I'm open-minded. I listen to all the different parts of the community, and it's really important for your elected officials to not just take what the staff brings to them And I don't think that happens too much in Davis, and if the school board certainly doesn't do that. But you do need to listen to your staff because we have hired them to be our experts in the area. I'm also very interested in listening to the people that are actually on the ground doing the work, our own employees. And very importantly, I listen to you, the people, because I am your representative. So I am a highly caffeinated individual. I have coffee with many, many people. So when you're thinking about what kind of team you would like to build to represent you on the city council, I hope that you think about the proven leadership that I have provided on the school board. And before that, I was on First Five. And before that, I was on the health council. I am a public servant, and I look forward to working with all of you to make sure that Davis can be the very best that it can be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sheila. And now we turn the question over to Robb.
Well, thanks a lot, and thanks for coming. Why would you like to hold office? That's the question. And it's a question, as the months have gone by, I guess my even understanding of what the question is asking has evolved. I'd like to focus on the features of the environment that any one of us is going to be stepping into to answer why. I think we're facing a period of constrained decision-making. There are a lot of reasons for that. That some of it is imposed from the outside, some of it's the reality of decisions we've made before. But our future in the coming years is going to be constrained decision-making. My experience is when we are in situations like that, another feature of the environment, which we've seen and which we'll continue to see, is that we face conflict. We face conflict within our community, with one another, conflict over decisions. That's a reality. In times of constrained decision-making, I've never been anywhere where that wasn't a reality. We also know that most of our decisions are complex. Take water, take wastewater, take our fiscal situation. There's complexity everywhere. To deal with the constrained decision-making, my experience over the years has been that we need to deal with the constraints collaboratively, through collaborative problem solving. I have 25 years of working in constrained situations where tough decisions had to be made. They cannot be made by an individual. They have to be made by a team. They have to be made working together. We need to work collaboratively. Dealing with conflicts does not mean avoiding conflicts. Dealing with conflicts does not mean moving away from the challenges, but embracing them to learn. I understand conflict. I understand how to deal with it productively. I understand how to embrace it so that we can gain and move forward as a people to make decisions that are in the best interests of all of us. I've been doing that for a long time. Even in my work here in the community, I don't shy away from it. The complexity, I'm a teacher. It's not something I talk about a lot. One thing I'm really good at is taking complex ideas and reducing them to understandable ways of having a discussion and dialogue. I'm committed to dialogue, but I'm committed to helping take complex ideas and bring them to a level so we can all discuss them together. I think what we really want on the City Council is a type of leadership, people that can deal with conflict, that can problem solve collaboratively, and that can take complex ideas and simplify them. And I believe I have those skills. Thank you.
Thank you, Robb. Okay, now we will move to the second question. And everybody's mentioned some of them already, but what are the three most important problems facing the city over the next 4 years? And we'll start with Daniel, I guess.
Are we going to mix it up at all? Or about,
Huh?
Do you want to start with John? That's what
Oh, that's
switched off,
true.
so I-
Thank you.
That's the most
We'll do
fair,
that.
yeah.
It's your place.
There are 4 questions?
I
That's
think
fair.
I'm starting. I believe that 3 of the most important problems facing the city of Davis over the next 4 years are balancing the city budget, funding street maintenance and repair, and funding employee pensions and health care. And I'm going to add a 4th, and that's getting city service costs under control, which includes water rates. These are all interrelated financial issues that must be dealt with together so that the city can continue to provide services and activities that we rely on to make Davis a great place to live. So they're united by the common theme of affordability. I also want to point out that one of the most important tasks that the newly elected council will be facing is hiring a new city manager. I mention this not because it's a problem, but because it's a very important job that lies before us. And it should be no surprise that I would identify financial problems, since my candidacy is focused on fiscal sustainability so that we can afford to live here. Honestly, balancing a budget requires identifying revenue and what it can be used for, and matching spending to available resources and revenues to find the holes. Then we can have a conversation about how to fill those holes. Without this, there will be no public trust in decisions about cuts or funding needs. Balancing the budget also requires knowing unfunded needs for long-term pension and health care costs, which must be followed by a decision again about where the money is going to come from. This should not be hidden in the city budget. Equally important and similarly unfunded are street repair needs that we must start taking care of to keep our local roads from crumbling. To do this, we need a plan for timely maintenance and necessary repairs along with the funds required to carry it out. A hard look is also needed at increasing costs of city services, which are rapidly rising to a point where single-family residences are going to be faced with at least doubling of cost for reduced services over the next 5 to 10 years. Think about that. Things are going to cost more, services are going to go down. All of this adds to the cost of living in Davis. And if middle-class families and people on fixed incomes can no longer afford to call Davis home, this city becomes a different place. So we must elect city council members who are serious about keeping Davis affordable. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And we'll pass the question on to Sheila.
Thank you. And it's interesting that I think most of us are going to have pretty similar priorities, because I think it's pretty well known what some of the issues are before Davis right now. We'll see, though, I'm only the second one. So my 3 areas that I'm focusing on are budget and finance, infrastructure and housing needs, and then program needs, so I differ a little bit there. And although you took the exact words away from me, I'm going to say that the first task, not a problem, but the first task is getting the right long-term city manager. Hiring a city manager is a very important role for the city council. In regards to budget and finance, it's very important to have a balanced approach to the finance issue, just as you would in your own budget at home. So there are 2 sides to the coin. We have the expenditures, and I think the city and the city council has worked very hard over the last few years to make some of the very difficult program cuts. Over $11 million in cuts have been made. That's well over 100 FTE that have been lost, and the programs that are associated with that. The other side of the coin to look at are the revenues. And I would like to say at this point that I am very much in favor of Measure O. We'll be talking about that a little bit later, but that is one side of the balanced approach. We also have to have a continued emphasis on economic development. I think we're doing better in that area, but we must do even better. I'm very interested in an innovation park as a way to bring in additional finances to the city, good paying jobs for our graduates from the university and people who are already here, and a way to broaden our tax base. And there are businesses already in town who are looking to expand, so it's very crucial that we move forward fairly quickly on that. Infrastructure and housing needs. It's very important that we address these. We've already started some of these with some of the road projects and the bicycle path and the streetlight projects that have been in place. It's very important to have appropriate housing for all stages of life. So we just had the groundbreaking for Cannery a few days ago, and so it was great to see about the community process for that, and making sure that we have smaller homes and appropriate homes for our seniors so that they can move out of their bigger houses. And I'm very interested in building up downtown so that we can have some housing upstairs. And third is program needs, and some of the areas of programs that I'm not sure everybody knows that the city provides even now, and very important programs that we're going to be looking at. Some additional look at housing. The water project is an important program that we're going to have further discussions about. The homeless problem or issue, senior services, and mental health services. And those are things that, with my experiences, I can bring to the table, service, because it might not be the city that provides the service, services, but I know all the parts of government and the nonprofits that can help to fill in some of those gaps. So I look forward to working with the community on those issues.
Thank you, Sheila. And Rob, what are your 3 most important problem items?
Well, of course, I mean, the fiscal issues are so overwhelming that I guess we could come up with 6 within the fiscal. I mean, John laid out a number of the challenges. We've got total compensation costs that are running so far ahead of revenue that even if we pass Measure O, which I support, it can only be a short-term solution. We've talked at length, not just about road maintenance issues, but overall maintenance issues that have not even been defined or addressed. In a sense, we don't even know the magnitude of the problem. And so the biggest problem is defining the problem. If we're going to come back to the citizens of this community and ask to begin to look at solutions, a definition of the problems, the definition of the challenges, a definition of those constraints is where we need to begin. Fiscal could dominate our conversation, and the economic health of our city is critical. We've got to remove constraints to expanding our revenue base, whether it's in our downtown, through removing constraints to redevelopment, or whether it's in the peripheral innovation parks where we need to drive hard bargains to make sure we get what we want as a city, but also generate streams of revenue that are going to last over a period of time. We're going to be working on those things full-time over the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. And it's going to take a long time to get the revenue growth rates in line with the cost growth rates, but we have to do that. I also, though, would be remiss if we're not just an economic city. We're not just homo economicus. We have other needs, and we need to identify them. The vulnerabilities of our city are many, and they're related to things like the rising costs. Do we even have a handle on who is having a hard time paying their bills? We need to get a handle on that. Do we have a handle on what AB 109 means for our city in terms of new people arriving with very specific mental health needs and addiction needs? Again, we have to define the problem to be a socially healthy city. But I would say, third, we cannot leave behind our commitment to being an environmentally healthy city either. We need to redouble our efforts to diversify our transit and transportation options. So I'm going to stay focused on the fiscal, but I want to be clear that the challenges that we need to address to be socially and environmentally healthy cannot take a back seat and wait until we get those things in order. And I'm committed to developing paths so that we can address all of those areas.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you all for thoughtful answers on
One more.
Daniel, I'm sorry.
All right, it's no problem at all. This is the kind of question you don't want to go last on, because everything's been said. But I will say that in my mind, the biggest problem facing our city is public trust. As I've been walking precincts, no one trusts the government. No one expects them to spend their tax dollars wisely. No one expects them to maintain the roads. No one expects us to fix the green belts. Everyone expects the city to continue to grow more expensive, which is why I hear from young families and even older couples that they're going to be leaving to Woodland or West Sacramento because they don't trust that the government is going to do what needs to be done. And so my 2 big issues, transparency and the roads. And the reason why I mention roads specifically, of all the unfunded liabilities we have, and there's very good points that we don't know the full extent of our unfunded liability problem, which is a huge problem. But for now, I'm going to focus on roads. Roads, we actually have that backlog mapped out. We know how much we owe. Realistically speaking, we need to be spending about $8 million a year from now until 2032 in order to eliminate the backlog and get our roads back up to 70 PCI, which is excellent road condition. We're only spending about $2.3 million right now, which means we need to come up in the next decade or so, find $5.7 million in the budget to go to our road repair. And that will not happen if the citizens of Davis do not trust the government. I think the sales tax will pass. I do. I think it'll be close, but I do think it will. But right now, most of the money towards road repair is expected to come from our parcel tax in November. And I'm absolutely convinced right now that if that parcel tax were to happen today, it would fail by a significant margin. I don't think that we're going to get 66% of Davis to pass another tax for us. our road repair, and the reason why I keep mentioning roads is because if you look at what people expect from a government, realistically, next to public safety, I think roads are pretty much number one. If they can go down the street and not have to swerve to avoid a pothole, they'll be like, okay, the city government's doing a good job. And the few streets in Davis that are being repaired right now, when I knock on the houses, when I knock on those houses, it's amazing. They come out and they say, yeah, I think the city's doing a decent job. It's just because they have a freshly paved road in front of their house. I think that the road repair is far and away the most important unfunded liability that we have, more so than the pensions. If we can solve what I believe is that the day that the citizens of Davis can drive down Olive Drive and not have to like swerve, yeah, I mean, it's not even a road at this point, it's like gravel. The day that they can go down a freshly paved road, I think will be the day the citizens of Davis trust the government. And the second part is my idea of transparency. I do not think that the city of Davis is currently transparent. And actually, one of the questions coming up is, what are we going to do about Measure O? But when I was precinct walking, someone showed me a letter that had been sent from Birchland Elementary. They signed up for the $1-a-day program, 30 seconds left. The $1-a-day program, and basically they sent $365 to the school district, and they received a letter showing line by line where that money had been spent: pencils, roads, after-school programs. And I think that with this sales tax, we have a wonderful opportunity to show the people of Davis exactly where we spend their money, that we are spending their money wisely. We're not throwing the money away on frivolous projects. If we can spend it on employee compensation and on roads, I think we can start rebuilding that public trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, and all four of you, and your question responses. Our third main area is, what experience do you have in handling large budgets? And followed by, what actions should the City Council take if Measure O is approved or disapproved, if Measure P is approved or disapproved? So you have 3 to 5 minutes to respond to those related questions. And
Isn't it 3 minutes?
Sheila's,
I mean, I can certainly do that, but I thought that's a separate question from that one.
it's a separate one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to go around with that number 2 question, then change to number 3? Or would you like me
We
to speak
already
to 2
did
and 3?
the important program.
Okay, sorry, I don't have my glasses.
So
Okay.
what experience do
Okay,
you have
experience,
in
uh-huh.
handling those budgets?
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Okay, perfect. I do have experience, although I can't seem to read the question right now. I have lots of experience with big budgets. I have spent a number of not as long as city council, but very long school board meetings in this very chair with the fire marshal in the back, because there's so much concern and questions about the budget. And I would just like to, not to disagree with people up here, but I think, Daniel, I think the statement that no one trusts the government, that's a little bit broad, at least for me. I think that citizens have valid concerns, and that there are issues with the city budget, and that people need to better understand what the city budget. But for people to, especially elected officials, to say no one trusts the government, I don't think that that's a helpful statement to say. The school district, and thank you for the example about schools, because we've been trying very hard for transparency. So the school district is an $85 million budget, and I've been it's a very big responsibility, and I've been doing that for 9 years. Before that, I spent 10 years on First Five, and that was a $5 million budget. These are large amounts, and I was a part of a team that made those kind of balanced decisions that I've already talked about. So, and am I now going to talk about Measure O now also? Okay, so for Measure O, if Measure O passes, we're still going to, and as I've already pointed out, I am in support of Measure O. That's that 0.5 cent or 0.5% sales tax increase in an ongoing 0.5% that we'll be renewing. It is critical and part of the balanced approach to be able to close our budget deficit. When that passes, we'll still have $1 million that we'll have to identify cuts, and just like we did with school board, we're going to have to work with the community in a very transparent way to go through the city budget and see where would those cuts happen. Keeping in mind that if you're cutting positions or you're cutting people, that you're also cutting programs. So you have to really look at what are the values of the community and what are the priorities of the community. One suggestion that I might have for the city, and something that we had for the school district, is that we have our parcel tax oversight committee. Now, The city has many commissions that have many opportunities for citizens to be involved, but when we have a particular tax, it's helpful if we can be able to report back to the community and say, here's the money that came in, and here is how it is spent. And going forward, as was mentioned about the possibility of a parcel tax in the fall, that is how you build the community trust and that they understand what it is that they will get for their money. I am pleased that that's not something that's on the ballot right now, because we have some time to have that community conversation about what are the core functions of a city government. To me, some core functions include the safety factor that's already been mentioned. So police and fire are very important to make sure that they are properly funded and responding and doing all that they can with the funds that they receive. And then the infrastructure questions. So roads is but one part of it. There are other structural parts of the city that need to be addressed, and we have to have that conversation about what are the priorities going forward. For Measure P, am I talking about that now too? Yeah. Okay, Measure P. I do not support Measure P at this point, and that is because we've had a long-going discussion about the water project. We need to come together as a community and say water is a precious resource. I think we all need to understand that, especially as it seems as though we're having a continued drought. And I'm very pleased that we were proactive and partnered with Woodland to have the surface water project in place. I absolutely hear the community concern about the complexity of the current model, and I got the little piece of mail that everyone else did that had the calculation at the bottom, and I thought, whew, that's a little complicated. But the city council does have the opportunity, not in the context of a lawsuit. We've had a number of lawsuits when you talk about losing out on funds that could be used for something else, and we're spending it on lawyers instead. I just like to point that out. That's not what I think is a great use of public funds. And if Measure P passes, that will extend even farther our time before we can get started on this, and we may lose out on low-cost funding that could come from the state. And there could potentially be penalties from the contractor we have in place and also with the city of Woodland. But I would like to have the continued conversation about how to simplify the rates in the future, but not under the Measure P, moving forward with Measure P, so no on P. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila, for your multifaceted answer to a complex question, I must admit. And Rob, it's your turn.
Yeah, thanks. So I've spent most of my career, almost my entire career, in the nonprofit sector, working with small and large organizations. Largest budgets that I've ever been part of leading an organization to deal with are in the tens of millions of dollars, nothing the size of the city of Davis. But I understand basic budgeting, and I understand the need to create a more simplified way of understanding our complex city budget. One of the things I'll just point out, every budget I've ever worked with is a combination of unrestricted and restricted funds. And that's exactly what we face as a city, and managing them independently and with transparency is critical, whether you're a nonprofit or a city. Let me talk about Measure O. If Measure O passes, I just want to be clear, that's only a temporary fix. The bottom line is that the rates of growth of our costs are outstripping the rates of growth of our revenue. That's where we are. That's where we've been. That's why our reserves have gone to zero and will go negative in another year if nothing is done. So you fill that hole with a tax, but don't deal with the underlying problem of rates of growth, you know where you end up in a couple of years. And so I support Measure O only because I believe if I'm on council, I'd like a little bit of time to begin to attack the rates of growth issues with my colleagues on the council. We've talked already a little bit about constraining costs, growing revenue, but our challenge is bringing those rates of growth into line, and Measure O is not going to solve that. It will give us some time to work on expanding our revenue base. It'll give us some time to come back and negotiate with employees about contracts, but alone it will not solve our problem. If Measure O doesn't pass, well, let me just say, even if Measure O passes, given what I just said, I think it's time for the City Council to have a conversation about what our core services as a city are. What are the things that we are committed to giving to the citizens, providing for the citizens? What are the priorities? I think it's long past time to have that kind of frank conversation with each other and acknowledge that maybe we can't have everything we've had. So whether it passes or not, we need that. If it doesn't pass, then I think what I'm going to be asking, if I'm on the council, what I'm going to be asking my colleagues to do is to send each department back to conduct a zero-based budgeting exercise. No more incremental budgeting. Go back to the drawing board. Tell us what it is that in line with the priorities we set as a council, tell us what your department is contributing to that, and let's start over. It's time to pause on that if we don't pass this thing. We cannot keep chipping away at what's been happening, has been happening. So priority setting, core services, and then, if need be, going back and saying, we need to pause. We need to go back to zero and define how it is we're going to provide the services, department by department. Let me just say something about Measure P. Measure P has been one of the most challenging things for me. I get it. I get it that people are concerned about fairness. I get it. What is fairness? And that's a genuine question, because I think I really want a true dialogue, and I'm looking over at John when I say it. This is not a rhetorical device to put the Measure P people in a corner, but I think it's a reasonable thing to say, what does fair look like? And if you say same gallon for everyone, that's not real. Same price per gallon for everyone is not real, because every system that we have has a fixed cost component. It has to, for the fiscal stability of the model. So I think it's a fair question, and I'm sure John will answer it, or begin to answer it. I am ready to engage in dialogue about what fair means. And if it means scrapping CBFR and finding a better way, I'll do it. I should add, though, by the time I get on council, it's going to be far too late to have that conversation. We need to have that now, because we need to get a rate structure in place, because if P passes, we don't have time. We don't have time to wait to have that conversation. We don't have months, we have weeks. So the current council must do, I think, what it is doing, instructing the URAC to come back with options. By the time I get onto council, that's going to be past time. And so I relish the opportunity to have the discussion on fairness. I genuinely do, and the time to have that is right now.
Thank you, Rob. And we'll pass the ball to Daniel.
Thank you. And Sheila, thank you for calling me out on that. You're right. I'm still working on my political filter. But I will say, having walked all the precincts in the city, that a majority of people do not trust the public government right now. Maybe not all of them. So she was right. Thank you, Sheila. Now, as for the question, what experience do you have handling large budgets? Not as large as I'd like it to be, but I do own a business. I do know what it's like to stretch every dollar. I do understand when revenues are down, you got to adjust the costs. And I realize I don't have a breadth of experience in the matter. I don't have millions of dollars under my belt understanding massive budgets, but I'm willing to learn. And I think that even as with my small business, when it comes down to even smaller budgets, the problems that face smaller budgets are a lot of the same that face the larger budgets. It's all about finding priorities and knowing where the money's got to be spent. Measure O is an interesting one. If Measure O is approved, which I think it will, first off, I was talking about my original answer, deals with transparency. I mean, I really think that we have got to take Measure O and explain all of the $2.7 million that we're going to be raising. Where does it go? Each and every dollar of it. If we can show the people that we're spending their money wisely, I think they'll start trusting us again. The second point, I think Rob keeps mentioning zero-based budgeting. And long term, I think that's a phenomenal idea. In the short term, I don't think we have the resources in place to implement it right at this time. I was looking at Phoenix, Arizona. Phoenix, Arizona was the largest city in the country to be implementing zero-based budgeting right now. They do it very successfully. And I was looking at how they do it, and what amazed me is they have over $1 billion budget. And you can go on this massive 500-page document, and you can see where every dollar's been spent. Even down to like the last like $50 to $100 on pencils. It's incredible. It's so much more transparent than the government that we currently have. I think it's amazing. And I would say that if Measure O was approved, my first step wouldn't be the zero-based right away. It would just be getting a handle on all of our costs. If you look at the budget, you see stuff for like $250,000 for community planning. realistically, what does that mean? I don't really know what that means. I don't know where the money is being spent. And it's actually surprisingly difficult to find that information. If we were to look into it and say this is $60,000 here, $10,000 here, and really break the budget down, I think that's the first step to eventually implementing zero-based budgeting like Rob was mentioning. And I think it'd be a great way of making the government a little bit more transparent. The final part, Measure P. And John, I'm glad you're going last on this one, John. And I will say that you keep mentioning that the water project, we won't have to terminate our agreement for the water project. I sincerely hope you're right, John. I will say that I think it's what we should assume is that Measure P is going to pass. 'Cause I was actually interested in supporting Measure P when I first started this campaign. And I sat down with some of the people who were behind it, and I said, well, what do you guys want? I mean, I'm willing to consider Measure P. I just need to know that you guys have a rate structure in place that you guys are going to agree upon, and that if Measure P passes, we revert back to a rate structure in 2012, and CBFR is killed off. Like, what do you guys want? And I'm not picky. I mean, they come up with anything, frankly. With Measure P passes, we will be listening. It's just that Rob made the point that if we get elected and Measure P passes, it will be too late. We have a very narrow window to re-implement the 218 process. It's the 45, we won't have time to reconvene the Water Advisory Committee. We'll have a very narrow window of time. Staff estimates anywhere from 45 to 90 days, where we're going to have to come up with a rate structure in order to pay for the project, or we're going to have to start implementing the termination clauses in the contract. And I think that when it comes to Measure P, that we're going to find a fair, equitable rate structure, whatever that means, we need to start now. If we can come up with a good rate structure that there is no fair rate structure realistically, but if we can come up with a rate structure that the Measure P people will agree with, and then so when Measure P passes, we can immediately start this, immediately push forward, and that'll pay for the project, I think that'll be far and away what we should be striving for right now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And I think he passed the ball to you, John. So,
Well, I've got a lot of notes scribbled down here. I hope that I can cover all this. I think there's time. To start with the first question, I was a member of the Davis School Board from 1997 until 2001, where we overcame an inherited budget deficit and balanced a budget that at that time was in the neighborhood of $40 million a year. So I think I can say I have real-world experience with large agency budgets. If Measure O is approved, the City Council that you are going to elect on June 3rd needs to ensure that money coming from it is used as advertised for water conservation projects, repair of roads, bike paths, and sidewalks, and maintaining police, fire protection, and parks and recreation services. Now, that's what is being sold as the purpose of Measure O. I don't believe it, but I'm not going to argue it. I'm just going to say, okay, that's where people say it's got to go. Let's put it there. Since Measure O is scheduled to sunset in 2020, I would think that it shouldn't be used to fix long-term problems. It should fix today's problems so that it doesn't become part of an ongoing budget and create a hole when it's done. Now, on to Measure P. Now, I support Measure P. I want Measure P to pass. In fact, I'm going to say that we're very lucky at this day, at this time, to have groundwater, because that is what's buffering us from the huge shortages that cities all around this region are now trying to figure out how they're going to cover with their reliance on river water that isn't there. So I just want to lay it out there. We are very lucky to be in the situation we are, and we would be very dumb to abandon it. Now, if Measure P passes, we would go through another 218 rate-setting process that, in my view, should result in a more fair distribution or equitable distribution of water costs between the different user groups, while raising revenue to pay for ongoing water costs, of course, and the cost of paying for the surface water project that is out the gate. Measure P is not about stopping the water project. We voted on that in Measure I. There has been some discussion here about what kind of rates we might get under Measure P. I will observe that fixed costs can be incorporated into per gallon costs or per unit volume costs. The problem is actually projecting properly what the fixed cost payment that you have to cover is going to be. I mean, if you assume you're going to sell so much water and there's a lot of extra conservation, you're not going to collect sufficient fixed costs. So that has to be figured out in any process that we come into. I'll also say that our previous Water Advisory Committee didn't just look at the CFBR. The Water Advisory Committee looked at other methods. Some of these rate questions actually have already been answered. It's not necessary to do them over again. So let's take advantage of the work that's been done. Now, with current water rates that we have right now, today, single-family residents and anyone with summer irrigation needs is going to be paying more per gallon of water than other users. That simply is not fair. And that is the biggest reason that I can give you to vote yes on Measure P. Thank you.
Okay, well, that brings us down to one last question. But thank each of you for your thoughtful approaches there. The final question from the league, you have 2 minutes and talk about, have you ever been part of employee contract negotiations, which is always important. And you get to start.
The answer is no. I've not been part of employee contract negotiations, but I'll continue to speak for the next 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
But I will not be involved in direct negotiations if I'm on City Council. We will hire a firm, which I think is a wise choice that's been made recently and will continue in the future, I hope, to represent the interests laid out by the City Council. My role will be to, with my colleagues, establish the parameters for those negotiations. And I think we know what the parameters are shaping up to be. Whether we like it or not, those parameters are going to include asking city employees to make greater contributions to their pensions, perhaps take changes in their medical care, perhaps reduce the cafeteria cash out further, perhaps, and when I say contribute more without backfilling the salaries, perhaps for some senior level staff, asking for salary cuts. We have to bring our compensation into line with our costs, or with our revenues, as I've said earlier. So it is the responsibility of the City Council to set the parameters, and that's what we will need to do, and that's what I'll participate in. I think another thing that I would like to suggest we need to do with the next round of negotiations is to place automatic reopening dates within the contracts. This is something other cities do, so that rather than wait until the end, if there are issues arising that we need to deal with, we have the opportunity to reopen and discuss. I just want to say, I've had the opportunity, I think all of us have, to speak with a number of city employees throughout this process, city employees of all levels. There's a really deep understanding that hard choices are ahead. And I think what I would like to make sure we do in those negotiations is that we do it collaboratively with an understanding that we're in this together.
Thank you, Rob. Daniel, it's your turn.
Yeah, much to the surprise of everyone, I'm sure. No, I don't have extensive experience with employee contract negotiations. I do have a little bit of experience dealing with independent contractors in my own business and some of my part-time employees, but I recognize there's a vast difference between that and negotiating with the 7 bargaining groups we have in the city. Many of them are unions. Most of them have a vested interest in maintaining their pensions and their salary, and it's entirely another ballgame when negotiating with them. What I will say is I think the city needs to view each and every labor negotiation process as a learning experience. I mean, I think in particular with the DCEA and the last labor negotiation, the city did make mistakes. I think that we lost the lawsuit for a reason. I think it cost the city dearly in terms of the amount of savings we were going to get over the time period. We ended up having to lay off the 9 tree trimmers, which was without question the ugliest part of the cost-cutting process we've undertaken as a city. And I think that not only as a candidate, but the city council members as well, but the city manager, the city attorney, the city staff, it's important for all of us to recognize that this is a learning experience. And as we go over the next decade or so, and we go over several rounds of labor negotiations, we need to understand that we'll get better at it every single time, and we need to be willing to learn about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. John, what are your ideas?
Well, I can say yes. That's a good start, I think. When I was on the Davis School Board, we successfully conducted contract negotiations with teachers and other employee groups at the Davis Joint Unified School District. When I was elected to the school board, along with Marty West and Joan Salee, there was much employee and public distrust about the school district's budget, and it had been earned. We dealt with that by opening the books so that everybody could see what was available and how it was spent. That way, we got the public's trust and the employees' trust. So this is how you earn trust, is you be open and honest. Then we were able to reach agreements on labor contracts that provided for the school's operational needs and for employee salary and benefits. After this, we didn't have any serious labor problems while I was on the board. I believe we need to do the same thing with the City of Davis budget to build the public and employee trust that's needed to fix the city's financial problems. And I have enough time here to ramble on a little more. I would like to recommend to folks that if you really want to learn about Measure O, Measure P, and the candidates, read the voter guide. There's a lot of good information there. I can also observe that we have the oldest and the youngest candidates here focused on affordability. And there's probably a philosophical point to that, and probably take longer to get down to that than we want to take here, but I thought it was interesting.
Thank you, John. Okay, Sheila, have you ever been part of an employee?
Why, yes, I have. Thanks for asking. Let me tell you, negotiations are much easier when you have money. When you have money to give, it is much easier. It's much more difficult when you're in difficult times. And over the 9 years on the school board, I've experienced both of those. So when we first started, it was pretty good financial times, and we were able to give some pretty substantial increases, which in retrospect, because that was right before the economy went veep, then we had to take a careful look at that. So that was a problem. And so I know that the negotiations that you have with your, and it's not just the unions, but we have other type of employee groups, and we have the contracted individuals, so such as the city manager. We have contract negotiations all across the spectrum for our employees. I'd also like to point out that I really, really value our employees all the way through. So the negotiation process needs to be a collaborative one, even when it's a difficult one. Providing open information is a very important part of it, but sometimes both sides can't be happy. It can be sometimes be very difficult, and then as an elected official, you sometimes have to make difficult decisions, sometimes against organizations that may have endorsed you or may have not endorsed you. That's not what the point is. The point is that we have to work together to make sure that the finances of the school district that I've done so far and the finances of the city are in order. So sometimes they're very difficult conversations, but I always want to start with the position that our employees are valuable parts of our program and of our school district or of our city. So we have to build those relationships, and we have to have good communication all the way through. So it's been both good and difficult and sometimes fun. And so I'll bring all of those experiences to the city and hope that we can work through our issues together with all of our employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. That concludes our league-sponsored questions. And I think each of you has a card. If you have other questions that you would like answered by all of the candidates, write it down. We're going to have a break of about 10 minutes. And so if you hold your hand up, and the questions will be gathered together, and we'll look them over and reconvene at 8:17, shall we? Well, no, 8:20, I guess. Oh, 7. Well, it says 8. Yeah, let's say 10 minutes. Yeah. So if you want a drink of water or whatever, it's a good time. Welcome back, and thank you for all of your participation. We had 14 cards turned in, and it's a hard sort to decide exactly which ones we can include, but some of them were addressed before in opening statements on things, but a lot of them were not. So I'll just launch in. There's 1 minute answers to each of them, and I'll take a little bit of time to read it. The first one is going to be, do you support the proposal for a city-owned energy program to replace PG&E? And this time we'll start with Daniel.
Yeah, good question. No, I don't support the current plan in the books. I don't think that the Davis Municipal Utility Division is a realistic plan right now. There's just too many political realities in the way. Plus, when I talk at the door, I'd say about 9 out of 10 people don't really support the $600,000 loan from the wastewater fund to the general fund at this time. I do think public power in the long run, though, is a good idea for the city. I look at what Marin County and Sonoma County have done with their community choice aggregation programs, and I think it's far more politically realistic. They have modest savings. What I like about it is, well, the difference primarily between DMUD and the CCA is that while DMUD requires us to buy out PG&E in its entirety, with the community choice aggregation, PG&E retains their transmission infrastructure. We essentially just pay them to use their lines to distribute the power through. I think that's a better way to go right now, and I think that the $600,000 loan, it really hurt the public trust, which I've been talking about, and I don't think that it did more harm than good. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
Well, I pretty much agree with all of what Daniel just said, so thank you for that. I'll stress a couple points. If we were going to, in the future, consider a public electric utility, I'd want to know that it was going to be as reliable as what we have or better, and that the rates would be competitive or lower than what we have. So reliability and competitiveness are two of the keys for the city ever even thinking about this. I do have a concern on the current proposal that the availability of lower cost power just doesn't seem to be out there. I mean, where are we going to get hydroelectric power? Some of the lower cost power is nuclear power, and of course that's not in great political favor, and it may cost more in the long run, but it's certainly not available to us either. Maybe some of the gas-generated power is less expensive at this point. Have to investigate that. But for the most part, the sources of power that are available are more expensive.
Thank you, John. Sheila?
Thank you for the question. I mostly agree with them down there. I think now is not the time to move forward with this plan. I do, in the long run, agree that it would be great to investigate a local public utility. The concern that I have is spending the funds at this time. I do agree that I agree this is something different. 600,000 has been already, that's a decision that has been made by the city council, so I think it's very important that we as a community, and hopefully me as a city council member, make sure that that money that was spent well, and that the information that we receive from it will be best utilized going forward. I'm also, one other interesting thing about it is I'm very interested in a diversified power source, and perhaps we can work with PG&E to try to reach that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Rob?
I think it's clear that widely dispersed production and transmission of electricity is our future, with local control. Why? Because we need to build resilient energy systems. Large investor-owned utilities is a model of the past. It does not create resilience, and it doesn't create lower costs. How we get there is the question. When we begin to walk is the question. I don't know how we're going to get there. I don't know if anybody does. When do we begin to walk? Right now. We have people in this city who have the knowledge and experience and desire to help trace out an innovative approach that maybe we can't even imagine yet. There is no reason to wait because these people are willing to give us their time for free. These are not just willing citizens. These are experts in the field. The time to start talking about what that collective future looks like is today. And we can do it because we have willing citizens who will step up and provide it at low or no cost.
Thank you. The next question is about past decisions. Aside from overconfidence in the national economy 10 years ago, what choices by the school board and the city council have put us in the red now? Have there been any misplaced priorities? And with John.
Well, why are we in the red in Davis? It's really primarily by choices that were made for employee compensation and benefits that are now growing really almost out of the city's control as CalPERS is trying to recover some of their investment dollars that they think they're going to need in the future to pay for the retirements of people that are in the system right now. And the fact that the city offers very generous health care benefits and has to pay for that, and those costs keep going up every year. I spoke kind of obliquely about Measure O a few minutes ago, and most of the money that we raise from Measure O is actually going to be used in order to support the increased health care and pension costs that have come to the city, since their last budget cycle. So really, it's health care and it's pension costs that right now are driving us into the red.
Thank you, John. Sheila.
Not to argue with the questioner, but the school district is not in the red, and it never was in the red. There was a high potential for it to go in the red, but because of the careful planning that we had as a team with our administration and with the school board, we were able to stay in the black the entire time. So did we know, what decisions did we make or did the city make that would have been different? Well, I don't think anybody in this room or anybody that was sitting up here on the city council or the school board knew about the worldwide economic collapse. No one knew that that was coming. If they did, they would have maybe made a whole lot of money on it. As far as choices, there were compensation decisions that were made in a different environment than what we are currently in, and that's a difficult thing to pull back from, and it's something that can and had to be done going forward. Healthcare costs, just one quick thing, I only have a couple seconds left, is that if we had a single-payer universal healthcare system, we would have much more money to be able to spend on healthcare. So.
Fine, thank you. Rob, it's your turn.
Let me just start with misplaced priorities, because I think that was part of the question. I think we've talked about it. I think not focusing on maintaining the infrastructure that we build is a serious problem. I've said before, I live at a housing cooperative. We're required by law every 2 years to do a reserve analysis of every piece of infrastructure and to put aside funds for the eventual repair of that infrastructure and replacement. Why aren't we doing that as a city? That's a huge misplaced, I don't know, it's a misplaced priority. It's just irresponsible of us, and I think we have to fix that. I just want to say one thing about pensions, and yes, we know that there was too much generosity. I think the thing that frustrates me is that it didn't take, one of the most studied things in economics is the business cycle. We know that not putting money away in good years will come back and bite us. We didn't do that. We can't do that going forward. We need to recognize that there will be ups and downs, and the sustainability that we need to achieve needs to account for those realities.
Thank you, Rob. Daniel?
I will say with unfunded liabilities, it's clear that what you don't know can't hurt you. And I think that one of the candidates mentioned the economic recession is a big part of it. And I don't think that had anything to do with it, quite honestly. We were floating in money in the early 2000s, yet there was a city councils there. We're spending just over $1 million a year on roads. And obviously it's a matter of misplaced priorities, but what happens with the roads in particular was a bit over a decade. There was a decade period, I don't know the years exactly, but I'll say from 2001 to 2011 or whatever, we only spent about $12 million on roads, and realistically, we should have been spending about $60 million. And one of the reasons why I do think that council, as I said, had some misplaced priorities, but when they're looking back at it, one of the reasons why they didn't put the money aside was because we didn't know the backlog. It wasn't until 2012 that we actually had surveyors go out there, look at the roads, say, this is our pavement condition index. This is the problem we're facing. We owe hundreds of millions of dollars in backlogs, and you have to be spending $8 million a year until 2032 in order to fix it. And what I think is important right now, the situation that we're in, is that we have other unfunded liabilities like parks, stormwater, fleet replacement, pools, that we, just like roads, we really have no idea. And it's something we need to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Question number 3 from the audience is kind of similar. It says, how do you feel about outsourcing city services as an approach to reduce staff compensation costs? We'll start with Sheila.
In general, I am not a supporter of outsourcing city services. I think there are some public goods that should be provided by public employees. That being said, depending on I would look at each case on each issue in a case-by-case basis, so there may be a limited role for some outsourcing, but in the school district, we don't, unless we can't find the employees, for instance, for speech therapists, we do outsource for that. But in general, I think that the public good should be provided by the public employees.
Okay. Next, Robb.
Yeah, I think outsourcing, and I say this unfortunately, I think it has to be on the table, but I don't believe it's a talisman. It's not a panacea that's going to solve our problems. And the big challenge with outsourcing, and we just have to acknowledge it, has to do with quality. It has to do with quality of work. It has to do with ownership. Talk to our city employees. They're owners, they're stakeholders, they take pride in their work. Now, am I saying that can't happen with someone that receives a job through outsourcing? I'm not, I guess maybe I am saying that. I am saying there's the idea of being part of a team, the idea of being part of a larger entity that you're contributing to. Those things matter. So I will put it on the table, but I want to make sure that we have quality assessment in place for every outsourced job so that we can compare the quality of the work done pre and post and be honest with ourselves if we're not achieving the quality and go back to city employees if we need to.
Thank you. Daniel?
As a general rule, I'm not an overwhelming fan of outsourcing, and the reason for that is looking back at the last labor negotiations. We got 5 out of the 7 employee groups to sit down with us, sign contracts with us. We negotiated in good faith, and we came to an amiable solution. 2 of the groups did not, but the reason why I bring up those 5 out of 7 was that if we sign labor agreements with these groups and then go all Grim Reaper on the rank and file and lay them off in droves and bring in private contractors in order to do the work for them, they will no longer negotiate with us in good faith. I think it's very important that if we're going to continue to get out of this fiscal crisis in the years ahead, the next 3 or 4 labor negotiations, we have to have a working relationship with the employee groups. I will say that attrition still on the table. We're still doing it all the time. And if the jobs are opened up by attrition, enough jobs in, say, the Public Works Department are opened up by attrition, I would consider outsourcing in that regard. But the idea of laying off employees in order to bring in contractors, I think it does more harm than good. Thank you.
Okay. And John?
Well, I think most of what I would have thought has been said. Summarize my thoughts. Yes, we need to review, need to look at a case-by-case basis. Everything needs to be on the table when we can't pay our bills. And at that point in time, I think we're in a pretty strong negotiating position, actually. And perhaps the public employees will be more willing to negotiate if they think someone else might end up doing their jobs because the money is just not there to keep going the direction we are. So I don't think any of us like the idea of laying people off and going to outsourcing as a concept, but as an economic reality, we can't ignore it.
Okay. Well, we have other questions that relate to this as well. This one is, over the last 5 years, city employee headcount has been reduced 22%, 102 employees, but expenses have actually increased. Why is this true, and what would you do as a city council member to address this problem? Let's see. Yes.
Okay, I thought the question was going to go in a different direction. I do want to say that 22% troubles me. And I've said this before because I'm concerned that we end up with a staff that doesn't match our service needs. Because most of that 22% has been through attrition. We need to acknowledge that. Most of it's not been strategic in any way. And so we need to acknowledge that we may be sitting with a staff right now that actually doesn't meet what we want to provide in terms of services. We've talked about the reasons why we can cut 22% and still have cost increases. It's known. Pensions, other post-employee benefits, medical care. The options for bringing it under control are limited. They're real. They involve asking for givebacks. They involve asking for employees to pay for a greater portion. But we're constrained there. We'll do what we can, but we need to acknowledge that there is no single silver bullet that's going to take care of that reality. And considering how we might grow revenue is something that needs to be part of that conversation, and I think we've been having it as part of the conversation tonight.
Thank you. Daniel?
There was an interesting discussion on a local political blog about this question in particular, and I wish I could have paid more attention because I think I could have given it a better answer. But I will say when it comes to the controlling that aspect, the cost aspect of it, realistically, it's labor negotiations are the only way to do that. I mean, I think we made a lot of success in the last labor negotiation. We reduced the cafeteria cash out from upwards of $1,900 down to $500. We got them to pay a bigger employer share, got them to pay a bigger employee share. We defined overtime. We did a lot of things. Oh, we also got the work week from the 980 work week. All those were, in my eyes, fiscally responsible things to do. We've got 2 years left until the next labor negotiations begin, and I think it's the same thing. We need to start chipping away at those a little bit more in order to bring costs in line. Thank you.
John?
Well, the answer to the specific question is the increased cost of benefits, and we talked about that in an earlier question. CalPERS and health organization costs are going up, and they're charging us for it, and that is what drives the difference between losing numbers of employees but increasing the overall total cost of employment. The solution for that also has been talked about here, which, employees are eventually going to need to pay more to access the benefits that the city provides them access to. More revenue is going to help, but we have to be very careful that if we get more revenue, that we constrain its use to pay it or to pay these costs in a way that we then don't incur further costs from that down the road, which means that they have to be directed more toward benefits and less toward salary.
Sheila?
So the specific question, I think, has been answered a number of times. So I'm going to talk about how can we fix it a little bit more. Again, as I've mentioned before, that it's going to take a fair and balanced approach going forward. The primary reason that our costs have gone up while our employees have gone down have been out of our control, has been already been pointed out. So we have a budget and finance committee, a commission that is going to go through a process, and I really support that along with the community of looking line by line at the budget. And also another thing that we haven't talked about is engaging the other jurisdictions like the county and the state and UC Davis to bring in partners, because maybe some of the services that are core services that we want to provide could be a partnered service, and so both sides would share, or maybe it's something that could be provided by a nonprofit or the faith community. The YOLO Healthy Aging Alliance, which is what I'm the executive director of, that's what we do, is bring people together from nonprofit, for-profit, government, and solve a gap in service or a problem. Maybe we can use that as a city model.
Okay, well, that's kind of a lead into someone else's question about What is your perception of the homeless situation in Davis, and what do you think the city can and should do about it, to address it? And I think that starts with Daniel.
Good, I'm glad we didn't start with Rob on this one, but, okay, I got three thoughts on the homeless issue. One, I think it's important for us to understand what has really caused the homeless issue in town. Like, I've heard a couple explanations, they mentioned, prison overcrowding, but I look at the homeless downtown, and they don't really strike me as recently released convicts. I don't really understand why the numbers of homeless in town have doubled or tripled in the past year. And I think if we're gonna deal with the problem, we need to understand why they're coming here in droves all of a sudden. Secondly, with the homeless issue, I think it's important for us to realize that not doing anything about the homeless problem is still very, very expensive. When we look at the costs of the police that deal with them, the medical costs, the fact that, in my eyes, the most important one is that I think our downtown has become a less desirable location, less desirable tourist location because of them. Not doing something about them is still very, very, very costly. And my third thought is that I think that moving forward, we actually will have some more resources available. Recently, we got some grant money from the state, which is excellent. I think there are aspects of the Affordable Care Act, and I know a lot of them have signed up for that, which is wonderful. I think it'll help them deal with some of the mental health issues in town. And the fourth point I wanted to make is, I don't really know how to go forward, how to deal with them. I've spent a lot of time looking at cities like San Francisco and Santa Barbara, where I went to school, and they've been dealing with homeless problems like this forever. Oh, sorry. And they haven't really come up with a big solution. My bad, I wasn't paying attention. Thank you.
Well, in terms of what's causing the homelessness increase, I think we ask the logical question is what's different? And the primary difference is really the transfer of prisoners, and presumably most low-level offenders type prisoners, from state incarceration to local county jails, and then they're released from local county jails either because of crowding or because their time's up into our local communities. And a lot of these folks are people that got caught up in the legal system because of drug problems or other kinds of situations that aren't necessarily criminal. They might be, mental problems. Well, those don't go away just because a person is released. And so now we have them in the community. I'm not going to say that I have the answer to what to do, other than we can't ignore them. They have their problems, their people. They need a place. But we just don't want that place to be right in the middle of, our business communities and such.
Yes, the homeless community is not monolithic. There are people are homeless for many different reasons. That can be alcohol and drug problems, and then that begs the question about the availability of drug treatment and alcohol treatment, which is nearly non-existent in Yolo County. There's a good number of women and children who are homeless, and we have some programs for them. The mental health problems is a chronic underfunded and underaddressed issue. So I think that before we just say those homeless people, we have to look at the problem more broadly and say what are the different subsections and reasons for homelessness, and then we as a community can then have the conversations about how can we best address the root cause. Another thing that was brought up earlier was AB 109 with the people being released from prison, and that is a problem in our community. So we have to work with all the different levels of government and the local nonprofits and the faith community. All of us come together to identify what the problem is and what will be our intervention.
Thank you. And Rob, how about?
When we see the homeless individuals in our downtown, we're looking at a complex set of realities that they've faced that have brought them to that point. The simple reality is we don't even see most of the homeless folks in this town. They're out of sight. They're out of view. But it's the same issue. We're dealing with syndromes. We're dealing with complex interactions. Some of it may be related to legal systems. Some of it may be related, much of it's related to mental health. Almost all of it has some component of abuse of a substance. What happens when we take away community funds to deal with these things, which has happened in our county, is that nonprofits and well-meaning individuals rush in to fill the need, and that's been great. But it leads to splintered services. It leads to needs that are unmet. I think the first thing we need to do is we need to focus on collaboration to define the issues and figure out ways to work better together across the nonprofit, county, and city to deal with the individual issues that are causing the problems.
Thank you. Okay,
I wish I could say so much more on this.
Me too.
Yeah, and I think we'd agree. I think we'd agree.
We're gonna have a conversation about this.
don't forget that you have 2 minutes at the end. You can amplify. We're just about to the last of the audience questions we can do. And hard to choose. What specifically could you do to support and or initiate affordable housing in Davis for young families and older persons? And not subsidized housing, but other approaches. I'll read it again. What would you do to support and or initiate affordable housing in Davis for young families and older persons? And I don't mean subsidized housing, other approaches. And I guess you're up first.
Well, if it's not going to be subsidized housing, then it needs to be, commercially provided housing. And so it's going to have to be of the lower cost variety commercially available housing. And that requires that when we design our housing projects, that there be lower cost housing mixed into what gets to be built. And we actually had this question, or something very much like it, at the chamber meeting, where, my preference is that we put, the more affordable kinds of housing intermixed within the communities of the more expensive housing, so that we have communities with people and children and all together in the same mix. And there are places in Davis where we have used that model, and I think it has worked pretty well.
Okay. Sheila, what's your take on this?
I've had the opportunity lately to see some of our low-income housing projects in Davis, and I don't mean project in a Chicago kind of way where I used to live. Cesar Chavez has some great models over there. New Harmony I had a chance to see just a few days ago. There are models of ways to have either nonprofits or co-ops or groups coming together. Another example is for seniors, is that great new housing, the 3-story one right across from Davis Community Church. That was a private group of people that came together and had an infill project, and they built up, as something I've already talked about, and they're right downtown, and it's a way for seniors or for young families to have a smaller footprint and be able to live in a less expensive environment. So rather than having a sprawling suburb and bigger houses, having infill projects and building up in the downtown so that we could have condos or apartments upstairs would be another place for particularly seniors who are very interested in living downtown.
Thank you. And Rob?
I would put the focus on developing very dense and high-rise rental housing. Another model that I think is extremely successful, though it's got a bad name in this town because of dacha, is limited equity co-op housing. I live in a limited equity co-op housing unit, and though we're not officially affordable, we've maintained affordability for people of many generations and types of families. We need to go to those types of models, but make no mistake, we're not going to solve affordable housing with single family residents detached on their parcels. That's just not going to work. We're all going to have to accept more dense housing in our neighborhoods when parcels become available. And we're going to have to go up. We're going to have to go up everywhere, and we got to get over the NIMBYism that's preventing us from doing that. That's the only way we're going to provide affordability, and the focus needs to be on rental or on another model such as limited equity co-op housing.
In my mind, the most important part of this question is the without subsidizing, because places like New Harmony are wonderful and all, but they're subsidized. I mean, if you look at affordable housing that isn't subsidized, we're actually very limited. And I think the idea of high-rise rentals is really one of the only ways to go. What's going on in Nishi right now, I think, is a reasonable chance of being some decent affordable housing. I think another thing we should look into, which has been successful in other communities and something that I would actually like to see in the city of Davis, is the idea of the small home movement. Other cities in the United States have gone with the idea of creating like 1,000-square-foot home, very modest lot, very small, low maintenance fees, low utility costs, something like that I would happily buy. And I think that a lot of young families getting started out would happily buy. And I think it could be a happy medium in comparison with the idea of the high rises. Both I would like to look into. Thank you.
Okay, well, one last question from the audience, and then we'll have the wrap-up 2 minutes from each candidate. The last question will go first to Sheila. How would you, how would you enhance revenues for the city and spend the city's money wisely?
Well, we've talked a little bit about this tonight, so I will expand upon that. Again, a fair and balanced approach is very important for any budget, but in particular for public budgets. So to expand revenue, I support Measure O as the half-cent sales tax increase. I am very supportive of economic development efforts, in particular the Innovation Park idea. There are 3 locations that have currently been identified, so one of them would be great to get started on that fairly soon. As far as being the careful spending of the money, I think all of the candidates, including myself, have talked about looking very carefully at the budget that we have in place now and making sure that we have looked very carefully that the cuts that have been made are the right ones and see if there's any other place that we can increase our efficiencies. So balanced budget is very important, and I will help to move the cities forward just like I did on the school board.
Yeah, the wisely question, I was just going to say, well, I have a gray beard, so doesn't that, translate? But I don't think that's going to cut it at this point. I think we can enhance revenue with a 3-pronged approach. One, we need to examine the potential of the innovation parks. We need to see, using a new fiscal model called for in the Innovation Park Task Force recommendations, we need to examine each site for what it will provide us in terms of a long-term revenue stream. Second, we do need to take away barriers to redevelopment of the downtown. RDA is gone, it's gone forever. We need to redevelop our downtown in a mixed-use way that will give us property taxes and will bring in new retail. Third, which hasn't been talked about as much, is we need to look at our neighborhood shopping centers and do everything in our power to make sure they stay filled all times with retail or commercial that makes sense for that neighborhood. Those are ways that we can increase our revenue within more or less the current city footprint.
Thank you. Daniel.
Yeah, I view companies like Mori Seiki as the solution to a lot of the problems in the city of Davis. Not only do they generate a ton of property tax revenue, but they're also, a top 25 sales tax generator, which I think is phenomenal. Companies like that are on, relatively compact land that single-handedly exceed the revenues we get from several hundred single-family homes is really one of the only ways we have of generating enough revenue to fund our unfunded liabilities. I will say that one aspect is always looked into is the idea of, bringing new companies in, and I think that the Innovation Park Task Force report was a wonderful report. Nishi's already well on its way, and right now the next step is going to be Mace Win 85. It's not just looking at bringing new companies in, but the idea of keeping our homegrown companies. Companies like FMC Schilling, we've had Tyler Schilling come in here and basically tell the city council that if once they've exceed 300 employees in the next 2 years or so, they're going to have to pack up and leave to Houston. And I view that as a real tragedy for our city. Companies like FMC Sheila, not only do they have jobs for graduates, but they generate tons of revenue for us, and we need to consider these business parks in order to keep them. Thank you.
John.
Well, I can say yes. Certainly, if it's going to be a significant bump up in revenue, it's going to have to come from some sort of economic development. We do have the business park proposals, calling them innovation parks. I think the one thing that I would add is that as these proposals come forward, They need to be looked at very closely to make sure that the promises are real. I mean, I've been around this community enough years to know that developments come, promises are made, developments are built out, and what happened to the promises? So we need to know that the promises are real. They have to be incorporated into whatever kind of agreement we reach such that they're enforceable. And so the revenues that we're anticipating actually show up.
Thank you. Well, that concludes our participation by the audience, and thank you for all your good questions. Sorry we couldn't handle more, but we need to save time for each of our candidates to do a 2-minute wrap-up of their, summing up their candidacy or points they didn't get a chance to expand on or whatever. So we'll start with Robb.
Thanks. Today is Bike to School Day, and I got to go out to Birch Lane and greet students there, and it was a beautiful morning. Biked over, there they came, smiling. Some of them were so excited. It was sunny, and you know, on a day like that, you know, you can fall in love with the place. And you know, I love this town, and I'm going to stay focused on it. I don't have any aspirations for higher office. I'm going to put my effort into helping solve the problems here. That's my commitment, and I'll stick to it. I will. Jacques Ellul, someone who I really admire as a writer, talks about hope. We need to talk about hope because we've been spending the whole evening talking about the challenges that we face, and that can drag us down. I know I've been to coffees where I talk for 2 hours, and like, did anything positive get stated at all? But we need hope, and Ellul has a good idea about hope. Hope does not have a plan. Hope has a commitment to walking in a direction together to find a way forward. Hope is not having a definition of all the answers to all our problems. Hope for me in Davis and for us in Davis is that we will be working together to solve these problems. And why do I have hope? Because we have human resources. I've never lived in a place, I've been 35 different countries, multiple cities, moved 20 times. I've never been in a place that has the human resources of our city. People who are willing to step up and help solve problems. I have hope. I have hope because of you. And all I want to ask is that you vote for me so that I can help bring us together to solve the problems, to face the challenges. Because I love this city, and I know you do too.
Thank you, Robb. And Daniel, do you want to?
When I was 18 years old, I couldn't wait to leave this place. I wanted just to flee to Santa Barbara, and after about 2 years there, I realized I couldn't wait to come back. I've come back, and I spent a lot of my childhood in village homes, actually. I didn't grow up there, but I had a really close friend who was there. And I remember going through all the orchards and the green belts. And when I was young, I really had no idea how special that was. The fact that you can go, you know, around the world and people will look at village homes and be like, wow, that is an amazing development. And wow, the amenities of the city of Davis has to offer, I just think are incredible. And I'm 23 years old now, and I realize that more than ever. People always ask me, you know, what's my vision for the city? You know, why am I running? And one thing that I think is an effective way for me to look at it is, you know, 30 years from now, when I'm old and gray, I want to look at 40 years from now.
Oops, he lost a couple votes.
Yeah, exactly. I want to look at, I want to be able to look at the city and wonder, you know, what have I done positively? And I want to see, you know, local homegrown companies that are changing the world. I want to see a multi-generational town that has lots of young children everywhere. And that's the goal. And that's why I'm asking you guys to vote for me, because I think I can make it happen. Thank you.
Well, my conclusion is that this is not a time for business as usual. City of Davis is at a crossroads, and if nothing's done, we're headed toward a financial meltdown unless we change direction now. Our current and past city councils have left us with much higher water and other city service costs, with road diet on 5th Street, with spending money we don't have to study city-operated electric utility, with streets that are starting to fall apart, with growing pension and health care costs, and with a $5 million deficit in this year's budget. that's supposed to be covered by higher taxes without being really clear about what they're going to actually be spent for. These cost increases are not sustainable and will force middle-income families and fixed-income residents out of our town. My question to you is, do you want more of the same? If you do, you vote for candidates who will not take a stand against this behavior. If you want to change, then you can vote for me. There are differences. I'm opposed to parking meters on our downtown streets, and I'm opposed to spending money to study a city-owned electric utility. And I support Measure P to get a fair water rates system. In fact, I have a record of speaking out on these issues and of taking action against excessive tax and rate increases, so you can be sure that your concerns are real. I'm going to repeat that, and this time I'll say it right, that I have a record of speaking out and taking action against excessive tax and rate increases, so you can be sure that my concerns are real. I have the background and experience needed to solve the city's problems. I want to balance spending with available resources before we consider tax and fee increases. I'm beyond the point of looking at higher office, I think, but I have a lifetime of experience to offer, and I ask for your support to help keep Davis affordable.
Thank you, John. And Sheila.
I get to be last. Thank you to the League one more time, and thank you to all of you here. I see myself as a public servant. I don't see myself as a politician. I know people have different feelings about those words, but I've already, in my short life, which is approximately where you said it was going to be old and gray, when I come to a community, I want to be involved. And one of the reasons why we decided to move to Davis is it was the kind of place where I felt that I fit in, because it's not a place that people say, oh, that stinky government, or it's somebody else's problems. When there's a problem, it's all of our problem. So even though we've spent a lot of time sounding like gloom and doom tonight, I do not feel or believe that gloom and doom is what is Davis's future. I think Davis's future is bright because we as a collective believe in each other and believe in the city, and we can together solve problems. I'll give the example of my YOLO Healthy Aging Alliance. It was started because there was a concern that there was a decrease in funding with an increase in need for seniors. And people came together, and by having people collaborate together and by having an advocacy group that's looking at, here are the problems. The problems aren't this. The problem is this problem and this problem. And then it's much easier to solve issues if we can identify them better, get the right people in the room, and then solve them together. So I just wanted to quickly say that no matter what happens on June 4th, this has been really a great experience, and I've really enjoyed the opportunity to speak to the community members and to speak to city staff. And I've learned a lot about city government, and I really, really love Davis, and I'm really glad that I'm here, and I hope that I can be one of your city council members and leaders in the future. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's been a great forum, and we'll just wrap it up. I think we've just about used up our tape on the television. So I just want to thank all of you for coming to the forum, and especially our candidates, couldn't have it without you. But this is one of a long series of forums put on by the League of Women Voters on public issues, a nonpartisan type of look at things that we've provided for 50 years. And so it's been a pleasure to be with you this evening and to have a good turnout and all these great questions from the audience as well. So with that, we'll say goodnight, and thanks again.